Hi everyone. Our book talk today is focused on narrative nonfiction. All of these are stories that have been researched or told. Sometimes the person who experienced this true story, experienced it, their life, is telling it to the person writing it, and other times they've actually written the story themselves. So of course this is a collection of memoirs, biographies, autobiographies. All of these are found, I should say most of them, in the nonfiction section of our library under 921. And others you'll see are going to be located in other spots, which I'll try to point out as we go through our presentation. Before we get to the books, I wanted to mention that the Spring Reading Challenge is still going on. And if you haven't done so yet, you might want to pick up a bingo card down in the library or on Schoology. You can download it there or on the library homepage as well. Lots of fun ways to keep you reading all the way through these spring months, even reading outside or reading recipes and making something. All kinds of fun ways to get you reading and keeping track of that reading, getting credit for that reading. If you complete the instructions at the top, turn the form in by the deadline, you have a chance to be eligible for some great prizes. I hope that you'll participate in that. Just a fun way to celebrate reading here as we are wrapping up our school year. The first book I'm sharing today is Astronauts, Women on the Final Frontier. It has two authors, and as you can see from the top corner, it's actually in the graphic novel section. We have quite a few nonfiction books in the graphic novel section because putting those true stories to life, both through word and picture, can be such a powerful way to tell these true stories and to share these true events. Now I've got a video in the bottom right corner. I'm not playing that video, it's over an hour long. It's actually an interview with the authors, and it goes on to kind of do a webinar. But I wanted to put that image there just so you could see one of the cells, one of the little pictures from the graphic novel, so you can see what those illustrations look like. And to point out that you can actually see these authors talk at great length about putting this book together. They do such a nice job sharing all about that. I would encourage you to even look up that YouTube video. If you type in the title of this book, you could find that. This book is about how, even though the United States was the first to put a man on the moon, it was the Soviet space program that made Valentina Tereshkova the first woman in space. And even though it was taking years to catch up, soon NASA's first female astronauts were racing past milestones of their own. And it was this group that had this challenging task of convincing really these people really high up in the NASA space program that a woman's place is in space. They discovered, though, they had plenty to learn about how to make space travel possible for everyone. If you have an interest in space, if you have an interest in how women can make all kinds of gains in career choice and in moving up in the world, paving their own way, I think this would be a fabulous book for you to pick up. It's in the graphic novel section. You would look for this on the shelf by the author's last names. The next one I want to share with you today is in the 940.53s. This actually goes kind of outside of a lot of our narrative nonfictions, which often show up in the 921s. But this one, My Survival, A Girl on Schindler's List, tells the story of Raina Finder. She and her family share in her book here all about what it was like to be, for her, to be 11 years old when the Nazis forced them, along with other Jewish families, into a ghetto in Poland. They were in very tight quarters. They had very little food and water. They were being forced to work. And they had to do all this as they were watching day after day friends and family be sent away, not knowing whether or not they'd see them again. Raina and her mother ended up working for a man by the name of Oskar Schindler, who was a German businessman who kept Jewish prisoners working in his factory, kept them fed, kept them healthy. And even though this was a wonderful thing, they still eventually were deported to a concentration camp. Thanks to Oskar Schindler and the work of others, they were able to eventually escape that concentration camp and go on to, to survive. This is her story. It's her story of survival. It's her story of tragedy, what it was like to have to look back at that time, know about how many people they lost, friends and family, what it feels like to have that survivor's guilt, but also a story of hope and how she was able, along with her, the people who survived, to be able to look at their life's purpose. It's called My Survival. Again, you'd find it on 940.53 FIN, and that is for Finder. Oops, my slide decided to advance a little faster. When Stars Are Scattered, this is one a lot of you are already familiar with. I'm sorry that my picture in the top right doesn't match. This is a graphic novel, so it should be red up there. But this one is, it's written by Victoria Jameson, but it was told to her by the man who experienced it and told his story, and that's Omar Mohammed. This is a National Book Award finalist. As you can see, this story is one that is just unforgettable. Omar and his younger brother Hassan grew up in a refugee camp in Kenya, and life was hard for them. There was never enough food. There wasn't access to medical care, and especially for Omar's nonverbal brother, that was incredibly important and very hard. Omar has the opportunity to go to school, and he knows it's going to be a chance to change both of their futures, but he knows it's also going to involve a great risk. It's going to mean leaving his brother every single day to go to school, and that will have some consequences. This is an incredible story, an unforgettable story. There's a little bit of humor along the way, but it's absolutely a story that you will not forget if you read. When Stars Are Scattered, look in the graphic novel section for this one. Be Fearless by Michaela Ulmer. In our biography section, this is Michaela's story, and it's subtitled Dream Like a Kid. I want you to think about something that made you feel really afraid when you were a small child. Maybe it was storms, maybe it was snakes, maybe it was bugs. Well, for Michaela, when she was 4, she was stung by a bee twice in 1 week. And it made her absolutely terrified to go outside. Her parents encouraged her to learn more about bees so that she wouldn't be afraid. Really smart strategy, honestly, because it worked. She didn't just learn what an important role bees have in our whole ecosystem, but she also learned that bees are endangered. And she decided she was going to do something to help save the bees. She started selling lemonade in front of their house, had a lemonade stand. And all of the proceeds for that lemonade stand she dedicated to, I guess you'd say, to bee conservation, right, to saving the bees. And the more she realized that lemonade sales was helping, that the more bees she could help, Me and the Bees Lemonade, her company, was born. And now she sells lemonade across the country. She has met with bigwigs in terms of Fortune 500 companies. She went all the way to the White House when Obama was there, met with them. She has a huge passion for bee conservation, and she has become this incredible entrepreneur, someone who has this dream that has become a reality. Be Fearless, an inspirational story. Check it out. Find out what it took for her to create this, and especially it started with a fear. Path to the Stars by Sylvia Acevedo. This woman started out, as some of you maybe have, in the Girl Scouts. She had a meningitis outbreak in her neighborhood. Meningitis being a disease, a very scary one that can lead to some really awful consequences. It left her family forever changed. You'd have to read a little bit about that at the beginning of the book. As a result of loss in her family, Her life was completely changed again when she joined the Brownies. And it was through Girl Scouts that taught her how to really take control of her life and her world. And it also drove her to develop more of a love for numbers and for science. It brought her confidence. I know a lot of you can relate to the idea of being a part of something, whether it's an activity or a club, a sport, just finding that skill, something you feel passionate about. And for her, this helped drive her to become one of the first in her family, one of the first Latinas to graduate with a master's in engineering from Stanford University, and she went on to become a rocket scientist at NASA. Read her story, find out how she did it, and find out how Girl Scouts really became the foundation for it all. Everyone, I think, knows at least a little bit about the story of the Titanic. Everyone's heard something about it. They're familiar. They know that the Titanic sank and that so many lives were lost. You might not know anything about this true story of the World War II sinking of what was known as the Children's Ship. That is this book. There was a ton of German bombing. There was violence during World War II, and because of all of it, there were a lot of British parents, in fact, by the thousands, who were choosing to send their kids out of the country to keep them safe. It was September 1940, and this ship, it was called the SS City of Benares, set sail for Canada with 100 children on board. As you can see, the ship was torpedoed. You've got to read the book to find out what exactly happened to those children. The last book I want to share today is Her Own 2 Feet. Meredith Davis and Rebecca Uetanzi share the story. Rebecca was born in Rwanda with feet that were not turned in a way that allowed her to walk. They were curled, they were twisted. She really had to just crawl or be carried to get around. And when she was 9, she got an offer that she thought might change her life. There was a doctor in the United States who thought he could do some operations, a lot of them, to turn her feet. But it would mean leaving her own family behind in Rwanda and going to America on her own. She traveled, again, she was 9, from Rwanda to Austin, Texas, to live with a family, the Davis family, and Meredith, her foster mom here, is pictured. And she knew almost no English, but she lived with them during this time, had dozens of hospital visits and painful surgeries, and through bravery and just an incredible spirit, you can see that shining through on her pictures here, it allowed her to have an entirely different opportunity. Read her story, Her Own 2 Feet, again, going to the 921s on the shelf and looking under UWI for her last name. I hope that one of the books I shared today sounds like one you might want to pick up at some point. But I also want to mention, if you haven't seen this already on our catalog, don't forget that in our Destiny Discover catalog, when you go there, we try to put together some collections for you to make it easier to find things. And right underneath the top banner, well, let's see, we'll try to load that one more time. Maybe it's not going to load for me. I guess I'll just have to tell you. There it is. Under the top banner there and under the topics row, there is the collections row. So this is the third one down. And you'll notice right here, the second button over says Narrative Nonfiction. If I click on that, it's going to bring me to a whole bunch of other books similar to the ones I shared with you today. Some of them will look familiar because I just talked about them, but I hope that a lot of them are different ones. There are some stories here that you might want to take a look at. Again, just by cover, you might want to click on them. You can read a sentence or two description, find out a little bit more, and see if there are some other narrative nonfiction stories that stand out to you. Thanks so much for your attention. Happy reading.